My name is Mickey, and I'm the Health Education Coordinator with Main Access Points. And I'm joined by Kristen. I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. I'm Kristen, and I work here with Mickey at Main Access Points, too.
So today we're going to focus on overdose aftercare, and we're going to take a kind of unique perspective versus any other resources that I've been able to find on the subject. And we're going to kind of look at what it can feel like for the rescuer after an overdose happens, and kind of just some like tips that, some self-care things that you can do to take care of yourself if you have recently rescued somebody from an overdose, or if tips for in the future if you do ever rescue somebody from an overdose, ways that you can help yourself. And do you want to talk a little bit about, Kristen, about why we chose this topic for this month, or do we want to go to the first slide?
Sure. I think we've had kind of a lot of folks lately talk to us about wanting some support after an overdose and as a rescuer. So not necessarily about how to respond, but how they're feeling afterwards, right? And so we know that a lot of times people reach out to us and talk to us about, usually when we're asking if they need a refill for Narcan, stories around having rescued someone comes up. And sometimes, people feel like they want to share more about that story and their experience. And other times, they just want to make sure they can get some more Narcan to have a safety plan. But I think one thing that was coming up in our community a lot was kind of like, I didn't know I was going to feel like this after I responded to an overdose. And so we wanted to sort of, like you were saying, Mickey, it's really hard to find a lot of resources on some of those emotions that the rescuer feels. We focus a lot on keeping the person safe after we've rescued them, making sure we stay with them for 2 to 3 hours, making sure they understand that when the Narcan wears off, they could be at risk, all of those sort of factors. But we wanted to just sort of take a look at how you might be feeling yourself after you rescue somebody, and it can really look different for everybody. So I think that's what the next slide sort of says too. Yeah,
and I think that is really important that it can be different for everybody, and it's really unique, and any way that you feel afterwards isn't wrong, or you're not wrong for feeling that way.
Yeah. Because I think sometimes then people end up putting, it's like that term of self-care we use so much, right? So you end up making yourself feel bad about not responding the way you thought you'd respond in a situation. And I think we're going to go through some of those feelings, and they're definitely not, they're just some that we offer out there. And there's some that I've experienced personally myself after responding to overdoses. But they're definitely just a list of some of the things, and could be so much more that people could experience. And I know, I guess we'll jump right in, but I think even responding to someone you love versus a stranger, I know for me personally, there's certain people that it was really difficult for me to respond because I was so close to them, where it would have felt more, it would have felt different for me to respond to someone that maybe I didn't know as well, right? Because our emotions come into play, our attachment stuff, how we love and care for people, all gets wrapped in it. And that doesn't mean that we don't care about rescuing someone we don't know as well, but it just feels different, and our body responds different, and all of that stuff too. I don't know if you have anything to add to that too, Mick.
Not really. Just that, like, I don't know, something that I've just noticed about myself after experiencing like really any like, because personally I haven't responded to an overdose myself, but I've experienced like high, fast-paced medical emergencies like that, and like after each one, like for a short amount of time, I always end up feeling like a sense of like shock where I really don't know what to feel. And like, I know like I used to kind of beat myself up a little bit, like, oh, why am I not reacting like the next person, but like it's so true that, depending on different relationships and past experiences and everything, it's going to change how you feel about certain instances.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess it's important to mention too, there's even the difference between, being a harm reductionist and the work we do. We expect that part of our work is going to be responding to overdoses that happen. And then there's our personal life where we might be responding to overdoses or other medical emergencies like overamping or other drug related emergencies in our personal life. And so, that even feels different when you're in different roles in your life. And a lot of us are doing this work in our harm reduction communities because we have a lot of crossover and shared love for people who use drugs. And so that can get kind of murky and can mix up, like you were saying, kind of like, how am I supposed to feel? Why do I feel this way? Or why don't I feel the way I felt when I responded at work, if I respond at home, or other way around, or whatever. So this is kind of a dizzying slide, and I'll take credit that I made this dizzy slide. And I think, I don't know if we want to sort of go through some of these together, but there's a lot of things on here that could be reactions when we're responding to an overdose. I guess just to pause too, I just want to mention, we'll talk about the
Oops, I think we might have lost Kristen for a second. So while we're waiting for Kristen to come back, I think that she was going to mention that later on in the slides, we will have some slides that talk about like what the bodily response is, and they discuss the nervous system and how we respond to different situations based on how we're intaking that information. So some of the things that someone might feel right after responding to an overdose could be, you could feel full of energy, jacked up, racy, kind of jittery, even disoriented. You could feel kind of like shook, kind of like almost in like a shocked phase, dazed. You could feel relieved, and you could feel tearful or angry or frustrated or nervous. Oh, I think Kristen's back.
I'm back. So sorry, lost you there for a second.
Oh, no, that's
fine. Go ahead. Sorry, not to interrupt. Please keep going.
Oh, no, that's fine. I was just starting to go over some of the stuff on the slide. What was it that you were saying? I tried to jump in where you had dropped off the conversation about the slides further in the slide deck that go into a little bit about the nervous system and how your body responds.
Oh, yeah. I was just going to mention just how all our nervous systems are in a really fragile place right now due to, the pandemic. I know personally in the last week, my nervous system since Friday has been in a whole different place with the results of Roe versus Wade being overturned and our Miranda rights and all of this stuff that's going on in the world. So those things just to keep in mind, how we are physically moving through the world and how our nervous systems are affected on top of responding to a crisis situation, and how, we'll get into, again, the slides a little, and I'm definitely not an expert in this, but just around how we are sort of been in fight or flight mode in different ways throughout the whole pandemic, and our nervous systems have really been kind of stuck in that mode for a lot of us. So thinking about that and then responding to an additional crisis or emergency can be a lot. I know for me, even like someone beeping their car is a lot for me these days for my nervous system. So, just to acknowledge that before we start too.
Yep. Yeah, I know with all the stress going on lately, like I've been a little bit more on edge, especially with the overturning of Roe v. Wade. And like I know a lot of people have lost people this, the past couple of years in general. But also like losing a couple people that I was close to over this past summer to overdose. I know I've like just constantly seem a little bit more on edge in that like fight or flight mode.
Yeah, definitely. And we just lost a few of our community members too. So that's also, I guess we can jump in, but that also, I know for me, when an overdose happens, even when we do rescue someone and they're with us, it can still shake you up for weeks after, just around thinking that another overdose is going to happen or another emergency is going to happen with folks. So, yeah, I guess some of that, that I know manifests for me is like being like really jacked up, like super hyphy, really disoriented and racy is the way I usually like, oh, okay, I got it. Let's go. Right after something happens, because my adrenaline's going. And that can last for like a really long time. I think sometimes we can live off that for a while until we crash. So, and then what you were speaking about sort of being shook and like in shock or just dazed. Things are kind of like in slow motion. I think someone said that today when we were on outreach, when someone was telling a story about someone overdosing. I could see them kind of disconnecting, disengaging, not wanting to hear the story, and just checking in with them and really sort of saying things felt fuzzy when they were trying to listen to somebody talk about responding to somebody they cared about. Yeah, I don't know. Do we want to go through each of these and kind of talk? Okay. Do you want to go back and forth, Mick? Or I guess I just did the first two, but.
Sure. So relieved and tearful, or nervous, or like a weird taste in your mouth. That one's pretty interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. That one always came up, I think, around the rescue breathing. So if someone had vomited, or if there was just, you're putting your mouth on someone else's mouth, if you used a barrier, maybe less so, but if you haven't used a barrier, just the feeling of doing those rescue breaths, and having your lip sealed over someone else's lip sealed, sort of that kind of taste in your mouth might feel different, or it might just feel strange, or your lips might feel strange from giving the rescue breaths.
Could also, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I was going to say, I could also see like if you had previously responded to an overdose before, like somehow, sometimes like if it's similar, how it could also possibly bring you, back to similar thoughts and, stuff to a previous situation.
Yeah.
And with me, like certain like smells will bring me right back to like certain experiences.
Yeah. Yeah, all of those sort of like somatic responses, right? Where you have all the taste, touch, feel, smell, even the smell of the air or the day, you can remember. I remember like responding to some overdoses where in like parking lots where people had urinated. So that smell of urine was really in the process of responding. Like some of those things that you smell while you're responding can really stay in your brain. Yeah. I think we'll get into the waves of that in a little bit too, like how that stuff can stay with you and how you think about some of those things, like following the weeks or maybe even longer after responding. So you think you're okay, or think you've moved through it maybe, and then something else shows up and you're like, oh no, like this is that same smell when I was there near, near the falafel place responding to an overdose that was outside the falafel place or whatever, right? So some of those things come back. Yeah. So angry and frustrated, just like physically hot, can definitely be a reaction with your adrenaline really racing through your body. Super fatigued or tired, achy, out of breath, right? We don't always talk about rescue breathing. It's a beast. It's a big job to do rescue breathing. You're already really shook. You're trying to give oxygen to somebody else. So like you might not be taking the inhales that you need in between the breaths that you're going. If you're just by yourself doing that, you could suddenly feel like you're out of breath. Sometimes people have panic attacks. Other things can happen like after their response too, once they know somebody's safe. So that's really, really real. Yeah.
Yeah, I imagined that would definitely be very, like, could wipe you out pretty quickly. It's one of the things that, like, I hope the changes in the new Good Samaritan law the expanded Good Samaritan law will help out is the rendering aid piece, because then if there is an other person there, they no longer have to worry about getting out. They can, you can have one person doing rescue breaths and somebody on standby if there's enough people there.
Yeah, definitely. And that's always like best practice too, to switch off for rescue breathing if you can. But sometimes if you get in the zone and you're kind of the one responding, it's really hard to be tapped out or to tap out. And that's another thing I guess that we didn't put on the list, is just being like so hyper focused. We've heard stories of where someone's responding and someone's waking up and the person's still breathing for them, even though they've started to breathe on their own, because they're just like so hyper focused on saving this person and doing the right thing. They don't notice that the person has already started breathing on their own. And that, that happens too. Yeah.
Yeah, another one on here, feeling unsafe. I could definitely see that, especially like, unsafe, not knowing if an overdose is going to happen again to the person, soon, or if, for legal reasons, you could definitely feel unsafe. There's also, if you're somebody that's using as well, like not really being able to, I mean, I know we can't really trust the street drugs that are out there anyway, but that can, lead to feelings of uncertainty about, about what you're using, if you're using the same thing that somebody that just overdosed was using as well. And then we have like love for your co-responder or the person you saved, or anger for your co-responder or the person you saved, which, there can be many reasons for either of those feelings.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that comes into like the family and loved ones and kind of your friends, right? Like once you know they're okay and alive, you're just fucking furious that they made you, that they put you through that you thought they were going to die, that you had to think that they, and sometimes I've seen weird situations, right, where like somebody maybe took someone's drugs that weren't their drugs, and then the person rescued them, saved their life, and then they wake up and the person's, screaming at them about, you stole my drugs or you stole my money, or those kind of situations could happen too. I know I've experienced the co-responder frustration before, where people that I thought were there with me to respond to an overdose like froze, or, maybe didn't respond the way we needed them to respond, which again, we can say sitting here now is like, there's no judgment and people do their best. But in the moment when it happens, there's all that adrenaline and it's like, where the fuck were you? I needed you to be there, or I saw you there and you didn't come over and help. So some of that can be directed in really weird ways. And it's hard to regulate all that, like after you just rescue someone, to sort of like come back to a place of anger or frustration. and bottle it up and like be zen about it. It doesn't, even the zenest of us, I don't know if they can pull that off. So yeah, that can happen too. And then worried about the cops, right? Like that's a huge one. So you wake up and there's people, lots of uniforms, and you're worried that the person is going to be upset with you because you called, because the cops are there now. You might have warrants, you might have things that you have to worry about having your name run or being checked on with the cops, but you took that risk to call because you wanted EMS to get there to help because you didn't think the person was going to make it. And now the person's made it and the cops are interested in you and talking to you. So that can be a lot when you kind of, after you rescue someone too.
Yeah, definitely. Especially with like them not doing, them not being trustworthy in the first place. The cops, at least.
Yeah. I think that anger, I think there's like the one on the bottom there about rageful. This might be my own personal add-on, but I think, so tell me if it's not. I think like, feeling really rageful at the system can also be really rageful if there was a police officer there who maybe had Narcan and didn't. You arrived. I know this is something I've experienced. You've arrived somewhere. There's been a policeman there for a few minutes and they had Narcan and they didn't administer it to somebody that we love. That's a real rough situation to try to navigate without getting put in handcuffs yourself. So I think being able to say to them, if you're not going to do it, give me your Narcan. If you're out of Narcan and you don't have it, and all of those things can really just heighten, especially when your adrenaline's going, can really be really hard as a rescuer too. And some people don't feel that they have the privilege to even say that for lots of different reasons. So I think, those systems that be the unsafe supply, lack of safe places for people to use, all of those things are just come in like bells after you rescue someone, because you're like, why am I doing this? Why do I have to do this out here in places that aren't safe? And why do people not have better places to be using their drugs and safer drugs? So yeah.
No, I know I can only speak for myself in saying that it's not just you, but I definitely that's one of the things that makes me the maddest, is that we wouldn't be having to lose people left and right if there was a safe supply, and if we could just dismantle the systems that be.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I think everything's collapsing, so this might be the time to figure some of that stuff out. Yeah, and then there's just the general gratefulness that the person's alive and that what you did worked, and that you did it good enough to get them breathing again, which is really nice. And I think that's I guess the easiest one, in the sense of just being thankful for saving the person. I think the accumulated grief can come from all the things you were talking about earlier, Mickey, too, just around a sense of all of these systems against us, and responding to many, many overdoses. A lot of people in their communities are the lead experienced rescuer. They're the ones that have been rescuing people for a long time. They're the ones that everybody runs to get the Narcan or to come help them. And they might be really good at it. People who use drugs are literally first responders. They know so much more about responding to overdoses than folks that are first responders that get there. They know so much more about chemistry and how their drugs work in their body and what's going on. And so saving one another is something that, people who use drugs have been doing for decades. And that's a lot of grief they're also holding. A lot of people that we've lost, when we talk about just the people we lost in the last year. And like you also said, sometimes that all comes back in every overdose response that we go to do.
Well, and something else that I think about too is like a lot of it, because of the stigma that surrounds people that use drugs, like a lot of the times, I don't know, like a quote that I had used before when I was talking about like celebrating tapering out of medication assisted treatment the first time that I did was like you kind of have to celebrate in silence, and that's how it is like sometimes when you rescue somebody from an overdose too, like your gratefulness and the fact that this worked, like sometimes there is nobody to talk to about it, so you also kind of have to carry around the fact that because of that stigma, like there might be less people to talk to about it, and which is also going to make that like piled on grief even worse when you're not able to talk to somebody about it because of all the stigma that surrounds it. And especially like, I mean, like some of the message boards and stuff like that, like you just see some people's outlooks on people who use drugs, and it's like, you know, it can stop a lot of people from wanting to even talk about it and being able to process what they've gone through.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And especially if you're a person who uses drugs and you've rescued someone that you love who uses drugs, like not being able to share that fear around, you know, is it going to be me next? Will this person rescue me? Or is my partner or someone I love, my family member, you know, is now at more risk of overdose? We know that when you overdose once, you're 9 times more likely to overdose again. So like these ideas that like once that's happening, and, you know, I think not feeling that they can put that on their other partner or someone else to say, you know, I'm worried I'm going to overdose. I'm worried you're going to overdose. This drug supply is not safe. Like, let's be the safest we can. And then when an overdose happens, not wanting to, you know, it's like relationship issues. You don't want to like go over the fact with your partner about how fucking like terrified you were that they were going to die, because it like amplifies, you know, that they made you feel this way. But then if you don't have another resource to talk to about it, you're just kind of like stuck. And I'm sure like many things in relationships, when we don't talk about them, they just build and build and end up coming out in stupid things about like Dunkin' Donuts orders or something, right? Like we end up like arguing about things that have nothing to do with the accumulated grief that really is about love and fear for the person we care about. So, and I think that is really spread within our communities too. Oftentimes we can't, you know, it's not normalized to say how much we love each other and how much we are worried about each other. There's like the jinx thing that if I talk about it happening out loud too much, if I safety plan too much, then it's going to happen. And someone is going to overdose. So it just gets like really complicated with a lot of different relationships. And I think that's the stuff that we never talk about really, or I don't hear talked about a lot after overdoses happen, like what you're carrying around after. And sometimes people don't, you know, I've had people say to me, like, come back from the hospital after an overdose and say, like, oh, yeah, it's really weird. Like, I'm having trouble breathing. And so people aren't always, even after they've overdosed, like, not connecting the physical trauma their body went through. And so as the rescuer, like, trying to explain, yeah, man, like, that was a lot that you just went through, without shaming them, without making them feel more at risk, without making it about you. It's just, it can be really hard. Yeah. And I don't think we have any of the answers, but it's just say it out loud and talk about it feels good. So yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say something. I can't remember what I was going to say now though. So, oh, you're fine.
So do we want to go over grounding exercises?
Yeah, I think these are some really good ways to kind of ground yourself and kind of take your body back over so that you can like calm your nervous system down. So do you want to go? We can go back and forth like we did with the other one, I guess.
Yeah.
So the first one, I think these go together. Sit down on the curb with both feet planted, hand over your heart, and then pay attention to your breaths and inhale through one nostril and exhale through the other nostril and kind of like focus on that. I actually tried that exercise earlier and it was actually easier to do than I thought it would be. I've never tried to like
Sounds really complicated.
yeah, it does. I'm like, how do you like when I was looking at it, I'm like, how do you breathe in one nostril and out the other? But it's actually possible.
More like a mental breathing, right? Thinking about doing it that way. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's probably the like key behind it is just getting your mind focused on that instead of on everything else that it's focused on. Um, Saying a mantra to yourself can help either out loud or silently. I am safe, they are safe. Just kind of saying that over to yourself a few times.
Yeah. And some of these are hippy dippy, so they're not going to work for everybody. But I think some of them that you can do without everyone seeing, you're just like trying to like feel the earth, just like ground yourself on the earth, right? Again, because sometimes it feels like you're floating when you like respond and your sort of adrenaline's going or racing. Yeah. Tagging out is a big one. Letting someone else take over so you can kind of step away is really hard. Usually, if the first responders are there, they want to talk to you about, take your name, ask a few questions. As a rescuer, that's up to you if you want to share that information, but it usually makes it easier if you do share that information. But it's not always, if someone is rescued and someone else is there and you were the one that has rescued them, and they can stay when EMS arrives. If you don't want to be that person, giving yourself permission to tag out can be good, especially if the person's like very irritated at you, which can sometimes happen. They just maybe say like, I didn't need you to Narcan me. I think there's a slide coming up where we talk about that a little, because it can be really jarring when you just like, we're trying so hard to get somebody back breathing, and then they're just kind of like, what the fuck? Why'd you do that? Right? Because your adrenaline's going, so it's very easy to be like sad or upset and just be like, what? Yeah.
Well, I know
and then leave.
I was just gonna say, I know, like when I was using, that's something that because I was using with my partner, that's something that I was very worried about. Like, if I ever had to give them Narcan, like, are they going to be completely pissed off at me when they wake up? Because, like, if I have to call for help, especially, like, and I'm sure that goes through a lot of people's mind, like, because it's like, you don't want to call the police. That's like 911 in Maine. The police usually show up anyway when you call 911, but you don't want to call 911 because it's like last resort. You don't want anybody to get in trouble. And, even with good SAM laws, you can't always guarantee that the cops are going to do what they're supposed to do. And so, like, I know with me, like, that was one of my biggest fears was like, if I have to, like, is this person going to be completely pissed because I had to Narcan them, for one, or for two, if I have to call for help.
Yeah. Did you guys ever, is it okay if I ask and you don't have to tell me, but did you guys ever have that conversation? Like, okay, what if we have to call? Or was that like really hard to have that conversation too, I imagine?
Because we've been together quite a while now. At the beginning, I'd say it was kind of hard, but I eventually, like, just like one day came out and was like, yeah, if it ever got to that, like, I am calling 911. I'd rather have that happen than see you dead, and just kind of left it at that. I never had to deal with it, so it's good it never came to that. But yeah, I mean, that conversation can be very hard to have. Like I said, I just kind of blurted it out one day, like, was like, well, if this happens, this is what's going to go down. You can be mad at me all you want, but I'd rather have you alive.
Yes. That's a very harm reductionist thing to say. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's an act of love, right? The same way we say leaving Narcan around the house, even if you don't have a conversation, if somebody in the house sees that you have Narcan, that means you're there with a tool to save their life if need be. I know I've had people scream at me before, like, why did you do that? You didn't need to do that. Don't ever do that again. And you know, probably not in my best moment of adrenaline going. I've said, like, I will do that every fucking time you overdose, and I will admit and give you Narcan every time I think you're not responding and not breathing to me, because I love you, and that's what's going to happen. So I'll deal with you yelling at me if I need to deal with you yelling at me, right? So, yeah, I feel that. Yeah. And people know that, so I think. Gargle with saline water, wash your hands, look in the mirror. Not my favorite one, but sometimes it feels like a lot when you've had people's bodily fluids and other stuff. Like you've just been up in people's space. So just taking a second for yourself to go to a bathroom if you can, and like just feeling like I'm washing that off. I'm washing that whole thing off that just happened. And that could be a shower or something else too. Looking in the mirror might be a little bit jarring, so I don't know how I feel about that one, but after you've responded. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. I could see like kind of like maybe looking at like a wall and trying to like focus on stuff on the wall or something, but I don't know if I'd want to look. I just know I normally don't look my best after like high intense situations, so I don't think I'd want to look in the mirror, but that's just me.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and then the next couple ones are, you know, more of like taking care of, I guess, things you need to take care of so that you feel okay and you feel safer. So sometimes, like, once someone's rescued and people know that they're okay, or they go with EMS, like, you know, there can just be like all of a sudden a lot of people are suddenly around, like, and they all have a lot of feelings and they're all sharing their
A lot of
feelings.
questions and yeah.
Yeah, and maybe comments about how you handled it or any of these things. So just like, you know, avoid trying to be the one to like address everybody and talk to them. Sometimes when we're in our harm reductionist job roles, we have to do some of that, which never is, you know, feels good. But if there's somebody else there who wasn't involved in the rescue that can do that, that's probably helpful. I also have a personal thing with crowd control. Like, we're not watching a movie. This is a matter of life and death. We don't need to have a crowd of people around. They need air. Like, we need somebody to say, back it up until, you know, usually people scatter when the police come, but in those cases, sometimes there's people just don't realize they want to do something, and so they inch in closer and closer and make it harder for the people trying to rescue. So, and then, you know, this one, moving any supplies or drugs out of the area that maybe don't need to be in the area when EMS arrives. You know, that would really be if a co-responder is there, right? If they can get rid of what they need to get rid of so that when everybody arrives, there's not just a lot of stuff around. Again, doing that safely, zipping up people's backpacks and making sure they're near the people so that there's just not, you know, a backpack open with a whole bunch of stuff in it that someone needs to see, or any of those things. That's like next level thinking. And I'd say experienced rescuers probably think about doing that, you know, to keep everybody safe when people arrive. Sometimes people will take other people's bags so that they're not taking the bag with drugs in the ambulance, like if it's a partner or somebody. But sometimes you run into weird situations where like someone's like, I'll watch their bag, and you know why they want to watch their bag. So that can get complicated too. You know.
Yeah, and then you never see the backpack again.
Yeah. Or you see it later empty, and so yeah, that can get complicated. So I think, you know, I know at least in exchanges I've worked at, we've sort of kept people's stuff until they've come back for it. and just have said, like, I don't know what's in the backpack, right? We're just holding someone's belongings for when they come back from the hospital. But it can get, we want to make sure everybody stays as safe as they can. And then the last ones are all sort of more physically ones, I think.
Yeah, I like the like push a wall or shake your limbs, or running around the block. All would be pretty helpful in kind of getting your adrenaline level to come back down a little bit. Um, Definitely drinking water or getting coffee or tea. For me, like tea can be really like soothing, and I don't know, like drinking ice water can be pretty soothing to me too. But yeah, getting a drink, smoking a joint, taking a benzo if you need one, definitely can help calm down. I know for me, it's like smoking afterwards.
Yeah, that was a good one. I forgot to put that in there. Yeah.
And then like music, focus and listen to a sound around you. Yeah, that actually reminds me of the like the nervous system stuff that I was looking into yesterday, like this like SSP program that's all like sound that like looks like professionals and counselors and stuff can use with clients to like calm down. I didn't look like fully into it, but it looked pretty interesting. But I mean, just regular music you can do that with. Like for me, I'm a like big person with music, so like I'll listen to music to like amp myself up, to calm myself down. Like I just like I've always been very moved by music.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, definitely. The pushing a wall one too helps. Like even if someone's like really overamped or their adrenaline's really gone up, if there's like a fight or something else, like being able to take somebody outside or like you yourself, if that's you in the moment, just like pushing a wall, right? Like pushing something way bigger than you, getting some of that energy out. Or I always think of like the image of the animals, like that lion and gazelle, I think, which I'm probably getting wrong, but like being hunted, and then the gazelle like plays dead, and then the lion goes away thinking it's dead, and then like it gets up and like shakes itself off and just walks away. Like, okay, got rid of that. Like none. I don't. So even just like literally shaking or screaming or jumping up and down or dancing or whatever that version is. I like running around. I have ran around the block before just to get that energy out of my body, and run with people. So I would say, let's go for a run, especially if they were really over ampy and like just couldn't be in a contained space, or the senses were too much and all of that stuff was happening for them. It was like the lights were too much, all of that stuff. And so then that can work if you're trying to shake off, that as well. Listening to a sound around you. I know like sometimes when we're talking about dazing out, like listening to like a car or a bird or just something around you to like ground you back into where you are, that you're not still in response, like the trauma response of an overdose.
Yeah, I was gonna say, or if like you're inside, you could even like the ticking of a clock, something constant.
Yeah. And then some grounding for people is like just getting on with it, not saying, not doing anything, or taking 5 and coming back and being like, all right, I'm good. Or like you said, having a cigarette and that's it. And, everyone really grounds differently, I guess, can find grounding differently, if that's the right way to say it. For some people, it might be like a prayer. For some people, especially if the person's left and got on the ambulance and they're not sure if they've made it or not, all of those things can be part of it too, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. I think that's a really important thing about the like what you had just mentioned about, your way of going about it might just be smoking a cigarette and moving on with things. Like that's that's completely normal too. If you don't have, if you don't feel like you need to run around the block or something like that, and you feel like you can just, like that's your way to get on, that's completely normal.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and I really like this slide. Oh, what were you going to say? Sorry.
I was just going to say, I personally think it will creep back at some point on you, but yes, it will live in your body somewhere. But yes, I mean, yeah, I agree with what you're saying. Everyone handles it different. Yeah.
No, I really like this slide as far as the I statements, like about what we were talking about earlier, like how I was saying with it, with my partner being like freaked out if I were to ever have to give him Narcan, and like how using I statements can really take the, shift the ownership onto you, instead of like, possibly making the person that you rescued feel like guilty or ashamed or anything like that by saying, you did this, so I called, but instead saying, like, I was really worried about you, you weren't breathing or responding to me, and I didn't know what to do. Like, I thought that was really good piece of advice.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes it doesn't come to you in the moment too, right? Like when someone's really upset and you already were worried about them being upset and then they are upset and you're, so I think that can help. And then sometimes, that can turn into weird situations where EMS is there and they need to medically clear the person. So they need them to go to the hospital with them. And trying to say to somebody, like, just go for the ride to see when the Narcan wears off that you don't go back into an overdose. That can be really hard because you're asking somebody to do something they don't want to do after they've just woken up. And a lot of times, that's when we lose people in those moments. They take off before EMS comes and then they don't have anybody with them. They don't have any Narcan in their backpack in case they go back out. And so I think like thinking about all of those risks can be really hard. So those moments of like being really kind and keeping somebody with you, even if you maybe weren't scared and you knew you were doing that, you knew you had to respond, being able to say like, I don't want to lose you, or I love you, and I didn't know what to do, and you weren't breathing, especially with this new trank dope going around, right? Like it's overdose responses have become so much more complicated and people seem like they're breathing, but they're sedated. So they're not responding to you. And that can be even more terrifying. And we saw that 7 or 8 years ago when fentanyl came on the scene, and it looked really different than older school opioids because people didn't know what they were looking at. So that more people were calling at that time for a window of time because they were really scared. And then people, who use drugs are amazing and adjusted and figured out how to rescue people from these different types of overdoses. And we'll do that again with trank dope and are doing that. And so just like all of those layers of like being able to talk to people about that, maybe not in the moment, but after, I know we're talking to a lot of folks in our communities about that, like, yeah, that looked weird. Like I was really freaking me out because it didn't seem like the Narcan was working, but they were breathing. Like I didn't know what to do. What do you do? Right. So that can be really hard if somebody's really sedated. You don't have a ton of options, right? Like you're waiting to see if they come out of sedation and they're breathing and not responding to you, or you call and have to like know that they're in a medical place, being checked at, but also maybe being stigmatized and treated badly. So it's a hard one. Yeah. Sorry, I went off. I told you to grab me if I go off. I went off on that.
Oh, you're good. I think it correlated to what we're talking about.
Cool.
There we go. And yeah, I think this is a good one as well, that you started to hit on it a little bit earlier, but that it can come in waves, that, you can get to a point where you think that you've resolved everything from, from the overdose experience, and then something happens. It can be as little as hearing a familiar sound or smelling a familiar smell, or even just thinking about the experience can bring all those feelings, or just some of them, right back to the front again.
Yeah. Have you experienced this before with things where you like, I mean, I guess we can share, we've experienced this as a team in the last few months. So after losing someone on our team. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I know I've also like felt it with like, I mean, even like going through something, feeling like feelings coming up years later, um like like for instance, for me, like this kind of personal, but I have like, when I was younger, I kind of went through like a some traumatic experiences, and like I had, you know done counseling and like talked about it, and like, learned exercises for mindfulness and how to ground myself and stuff like that. And I had I had finally, like, because I have a history of having like some pretty severe nightmares, and like I had gotten, like, hadn't had a nightmare in like 2 years, and it, like, the stupidest thing happened. Like, I think it was an argument that I saw at like Walmart or something, and like within like a day, like the nightmares had started coming back. Like, it's crazy how our mind can work with it, pulling different feelings to the surface from just like something that you wouldn't even think would like affect you. Like, literally, it was like two people yelling across the parking lot or something, and I was like, just like brought me right back.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. That's like very real. Um, yeah. Um, and I think, like we were talking about, our nervous systems are all just like shot right now on top of that. So, yeah, and also a lot of us that work in communities are, you know, are sort of in that accumulated grief, all of the time, hyper aware, hyper empaths, hyper feel people's energy if we don't protect our own energy. And so it could be like you keep it together for work or whatever, in whatever community space you're in, and then you're at Walmart and someone's yelling about something, and it just is the thing. I'm very sensitive to people yelling in general. Like, that stuff bothers me really, a lot. Just so I feel that too, definitely. Trying to keep it moving for other people's sake, and like making yourself look good and strong and task oriented, and like, I got it, I'm just keeping it where, we'll get to it, it's there, but we'll get to it, is one that I think harm reductionists do really fucking well. I don't know if it always serves us really well, because there's more stuff, right? Like, something happens and somebody else who is not attached to that comes to you within an hour saying, this terrible thing has happened, or I need support with this, or I need to talk to you about these things. And so we try to show up for our folks in every wave, but we've got all these other waves going on inside of us too. So I think that's like something I've been working on for the last like 20 years. So Anna's keeping us moving. Our TA person's keeping us moving. Thank you. So the nervous system, again, not experts at all, but actually Mickey might be an expert. But when we're going through trauma stuff, it's just good to know what's happening in our body. So our nervous systems, it regulates our bodily functions, our breathing, our heart rate, our body flow, our blood flow, not our body flow, but maybe our body flow too, blood pressure, digestion, which is a big beast for me, and, you know, my nervous system is a wreck. I cannot keep anything in my stomach. And, you know, it connects to our central nervous system, the peripheral nervous system. So all of our organs, our limbs, our skin. It's like why when people say we're stressed out, you suddenly have zits at like 40 something years old, and you're like, how is this happening? So, you know, just thinking, I guess, about, you know, how these events can affect our nervous system and why. You know, it might not change any way that we feel, but at least knowing, okay, I am in fight and flight, right? And then there's this cute image. I don't know why, I've just always really liked this image. I don't know, it's very small to read, but, you know, there's a lot of hidden effects that we don't always sort of like think about. Our sphincters close when we're in fight or flight. When we're thinking about like whether we're going to respond and or whether we're going to run. Freeze and fawn kind of like fall into the parasympathetic, but they are survival modes, right? So when we're talking about that Giselle or Gazelle, is it Gazelle or Giselle? I don't know. Gazelle, I think. It
Yeah, I think
is
Giselle.
Giselle. Giselle is a supermodel still. Okay. The Gazelle would be like freezing, you know, and that's part of it as well. And Willie and I were talking about fawn today a little bit. So I don't know if you have thoughts on like the fight or flight, and I think we've been in it for a while now on top of these other things, but about like sort of perceiving the threat, and a threat could even be like, you know, the idea of the threat coming, the idea of an overdose happening. And so that threat can start to kick up our sympathetic nervous system into like, I might have to respond, right? What am I going to do? Am I going to jump in? And yeah, I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I'd say the only thought that I really have on it is like that also like with the like, and I don't know if this is like something that is more common to like Maine or if this is also common in other areas, but like especially lately it seems like we don't even get a chance for our nervous systems to completely calm down before from the last event before the next event happens, with as many people as we are losing to overdose right now. And that's like the people that we're losing to overdose. That does, like the numbers that are reported don't even count like the numbers of even the numbers that we supposedly have that are to report the number of successful overdose reversals aren't correct, because we know so many of them aren't reported, and are just rescued by friends and are rescued by friends and family, and the police don't, the police and 911 don't ever get called. But like, I think that a lot of us are going from a point where like our nervous system's never really getting that chance to get to homeostasis from the fight or flight, because we're just constantly going through it with as many people with the poison drug supply right now.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's really well said. Homeostasis, what a good word. We should all embrace that word a lot more. Yeah. And so I think there's a slide that's coming up that's like, there's no good or bad how our nervous system is. And I think we all have to we're not going to help our nervous system by stressing about how our nervous system is responding. But in those moments of fight or flight, I think I have frozen in moments of response where I wasn't sure what the best thing to do is. If someone's saying like in an overdose situation, don't call 911. And then moving, if we could go back to just the last, yes, thank you. The last slide would be good for 1 sec. just about resting and digesting. And if you've ever noticed, like when you're responding to something after a few days or weeks after, like maybe you're not sleeping, maybe you're not hungry, maybe you're really sort of disconnected or isolating, all of those things are some of the things in the waves that like are good. Maybe you don't necessarily need to do anything about them, but just being aware that those things are happening and like how that's affecting your nervous system and your body too. So it is important, and this is from one of my teachers who I stole all these slides from, around, you know, our bodies are doing everything to protect us, even in fight or flight. So when we kick into fight, it's because we're like kicking into action, kicking into fighting to keep somebody alive, to respond. But the thing is like, when do we switch that off? And so if we've got like people fighting after we respond, we're still in like there's an argument happening, we're still in the thing, right? We have not switched into our rest and digest and feed and be human type of system. So yeah, I guess taking the information and the tools to bring ourselves closer to balance. And like you're saying, Mickey, it's just really fucking hard when you're in it all of the time. And our folks are community of people who use drugs are in it all of the time, worried about each other all of the time, witnessing injustice against them, discrimination against them, distrust of healthcare systems, distrust of the police, distrust of these people that are supposed to be there to help them. So that just creates a whole other sense of like fight or flight at all times. Yeah, and then the way your system's perceiving the things or conditioning, that one always is interesting to me, because it's like, do you become conditioned to be in fight or flight all of the time? And I mean, I think in a lot of ways, the answer is yes to that, especially right now. Yeah, I don't know if you have thoughts on this one. And this is like just about your nervous system in general. It could be following an overdose, but it could just be living your life with your nervous system in general.
Yeah, I think that the last one's like really important. Just be and accepting where you are rather than where you think you should be. Um, you know, regardless of where you are on that spectrum of feeling all the feelings. Just accepting that they you don't need to change anything about it, just as long as you're comfortable with it. Obviously, if it's something you're not comfortable with, then yes, do what you can to change it. But if it's kind of goes back to the whole thing of like just being conscious that how you feel isn't bad or wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, like that idea when we have things that aren't processed and we get quiet, suddenly they come forward. So whether we want them, whether we've been trying not to have that happen or not. So and I think the last slide is just more about like, what are some things that we have done together to share and hold some of the grief and joy. So when we are ready, when we do get quiet, if we are ready to process it, make sure that we're processing it with the safest people we can, with people who get it. I think that's a large part of our harm reduction world, is trying to explain to people who don't get it over and over again why people who use drugs' lives are important and should be of value. And if they're really wanting to do the long-term work to support people who use drugs in the communities, that's a whole other sense of grief that we can talk about and have another training about, but that's a whole other thing. And then, yeah, acknowledging it where we feel it in our bodies, because that book that we've both read, our bodies really keep the score. So even if we keep it moving, our bodies are eventually gonna hit the stop button and remind us that we didn't deal with some shit.
Yeah. Yeah, if you don't deal with it, it will come back. It will come up at some point in time, usually when you least expect it.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, do you have any other favorites on the list here around?
I like the whole celebration of lives and remembers people's dreams and our missions. Um, like I think it's good to remember the people that we've lost, but I also I really like to celebrate lives that we've saved with our community and the people who rescued them, because especially with the number of people that we are losing, um, I think that that's some of what gets lost in every day of just living through it is celebrating some of the successes. um and if you're only focusing on the bad and the stressful and the losses, it can make it a lot harder to continue to move forward. So I'd say that's probably my favorite one on there, is celebrating the life saved with our community and the people that have done the rescues.
Yeah. Yeah, mine too, I think. And creating some sort of way to get other people to acknowledge that with us around that, people who use drugs save one another daily, weekly. And I like the pause, listen, and believe people's experience as rescuers. That one is one that I'm always learning and relearning. That, people's version of their experience in rescuing somebody is their reality, is their version of what happened. And so really believing them and where they are with that, the way we meet people where they are with other things, and being curious and talking to folks about those rescues and not sort of putting our agenda in there and asking lots of our questions that if we just listened, they would tell us the answers to them anyways. Yeah, so I like those. And then I like, creating physical spaces for folks too. I think that can be helpful, just for people to have, no matter how they what they need or how they respond, they can always have a physical space to go to remember someone or to be there by themselves or, yeah. So I think, yeah, and ask our harm reduction family for help. And
Yep.
lots of folks have been going through this, and we stand on their shoulders. And they, probably know how to support maybe sometimes better than we do. So being able to reach out to a wider spread community feels really good to know that folks are there for us. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, and that's probably a segue into the next thing that I was going to say. I'm really excited for one of our future projects that we've been talking about, kind of that's eventually going to follow this one, is talking to some, talking to and getting some firsthand experiences from people that have rescued people from overdose or even have tried to rescue people from an overdose. I think it's really important to get some of the stories out there so to reduce some of the stigma. Um, you know, so often, like with anything, you hear more about negative than you do positive. Regardless of what the subject is, you're always going to hear about the negative stories before you hear about the positive ones. And I think it's a really good way to kind of humanize it again, so that, and I think a lot of people hearing the word overdose, especially people that aren't connected with it, it can kind of get to the point where it gets almost like, oh, I can't think of the word, but kind of gets impersonal, where they just hear the word and don't really think of what it actually means because they hear it so often. So actually getting some stories behind their real life accounts and how people who use drugs are out there on the front line saving other people who use drugs. Yeah, I'm really excited for that.
Yeah,
So.
me too. Yeah. Yeah, I think it's like, what's the saying? Put your money where your mouth is, or put your something like we really are saying we want people who use drugs at tables to make decisions about their healthcare, about their needs, about services for them. Like this is the start of recognizing how much they're holding in the communities, and how many people they've saved, and how, you know, how sometimes larger funding sources and people that hold money make these decisions for people that do not line up with their value systems or what they actually want for their communities. So I'm excited too. And I always learn something when we sit down to hear rescue stories, and they are stories of joy. Like if we really think about it, and I think that helps with what you were saying about overdose and sort of that word becoming, same with harm reduction, just these phrases we use and we throw out there. These are human beings, and they're people rescuing each other every day. So I think that's going to be really cool. And then also we'll hopefully have a little addition where we talk about, and maybe even hear from people about why they use alone and why that's part of their ritual, and why they use drugs for pleasure. And we're hopefully just going to like open it up and get lots of folks, maybe on audio, maybe on video. We're not sure yet. But if you have a story in mind that you'd like to share, if you've had just thoughts that you want to share, if you have other people in mind that you think would like to contribute to the project and help us, can definitely be in touch with Mickey. Mickey's kind of our main person for that, but you can definitely reach out to any of us. And yeah, I'm hoping this was like a helpful, quick chat just around maybe something a little different. And there's our number for, being able, I don't know, Mickey, we can't put I don't know if you can put your number in the live stream, the chat thing too, but yeah, I don't know if you can. Maybe Anna can, or our TA person can.
Yeah, maybe I can type it to Anna.
Yeah. But I think, maybe there'll be more conversations to have about, I think we've got it in there. I think we've got your number in there. Maybe. It's hard to do these live streams. You can't really see what's going on in the chat and then in the other thing. So thank you. Thank you, person doing all of the technology.
Yes,
it's not us. Yeah. So I guess this is the start of something beautiful and different conversations about responding to overdose. And there we go, Mickey's number. And yeah, even if you don't want to, you want to anonymously share something, we can do that too, and have it written or have some version of it, whatever way you'd like. So we'll be looking forward to hearing from you. Yeah. And thank you for saving lives.
Yes, thank you for joining us. And like Kristen said, if you want to get involved, definitely reach out to the number that's on the screen, 319-8284. And like Kristen said, we can do it anonymously. If you would, we can do just a voice recording, writing it down, and somebody else reading it. We can make it completely anonymous if you do not want to be seen. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you, guys. And we're always here, if you do respond to an overdose, or if you've experienced an overdose, please reach out to us. Everything is, confidential and can be anonymous as well. And we're just here to be a place where people can talk about it and maybe shake some of it off and leave what you want, and also just be really valued for saving each other. So thank you. Okay.